Welcome to the Headley Highlight Show's Headley Headspaces, and this headspace is called Digital IDs. Wasn't in the Labour manifesto, and who's really behind it? Let's talk about Tony Blair and the Tony Blair Institute and Larry Ellison. So before I jump into my headspace, which is called Digital IDs, that wasn't in the Labour manifesto. Who's really behind it? Let's talk about Tony Blair, the Tony Blair Institute and Larry Ellison. And what I forgot to say also, and Tommy Robinson. So before I jump into the headspace, let me say thank you so much to everyone who's been listening, commenting and liking my content. Don't forget to subscribe by clicking the bell notification and selecting all. Also make a contribution. I'm very partial to 3 rings and chips and a Miranda, or you might want to get me a bit of BritCoin. Both will be greatly appreciated. Don't forget to like, comment and hype, which is a new facility on YouTube, which allows me to gather hype points and rise up the hype leaderboard. So now that we've done that preamble, let's jump straight into my headspace, which is called Digital IDs. It wasn't in the Labour manifesto. What's really behind it? And let's talk about the Tony Blair Institute and his relationship with Larry Ellison, but let's not forget Tommy Robinson. So I think it was on Monday, Calamity Keir stood up at the conference and announced the panacea to the migration problem, allegedly. And what that is digital IDs. He then said it's just not possible for anybody to work in this country if they don't have a digital ID. Enter stage left, Keir Lamity at the Labour conference.
Now, you will all have issues in your own countries, but in Britain, it's illegal migration. And I suspect that may be the same in a number of other countries. For too many years, it's been too easy for people to come here, slip into the shadow economy, and remain here illegally.
So here he's setting out the rationale for why we need ID cards, and look how he places the country and its people on a pedestal by saying, we've been squeamish, you know what it is? We found it difficult, but now we're going to be a little bit more robust. We need to find the fortitude. Carry on, Keir Lamity.
Because, frankly, we've been squeamish about saying things that are clearly true. It's not just that it's not compassionate left-wing politics to rely on labour that exploits foreign workers and undercuts fair wages, but the simple fact that every nation needs to have control over its borders. We do need to know who is in our country.
And the constant spectre of the onslaught, effectively, of migrants on our shores is the regular public hysteria that's placed in front of you and us as something to consume. And on the back of this public hysteria is the ID card system. But no one's really telling you who it's for and why it's being put in place and what companies are going to benefit and what memorandum of understanding we already have and what organisations are using iris scanning in public spaces. We're not talking about that. No, let's carry on, Keir.
Our immigration system does need to be fair if we want to maintain that binding contract that our politics is built on. And that is why today I am announcing this government will make a new free-of-charge digital ID mandatory for the right to work.
That doesn't just include people who are coming to the country, it's for everybody. This is not just something that's going to be applicable for migrants, so it's okay, we can just ignore it, we don't need to worry about it, it's only the migrants that it's going to impact. That's a rather myopic, and I would even contest, a foolish approach. This government, the Labour government, is pushing artificial intelligence because of its relationship with the tech billionaires in and around that space. I'm coming to the Tony Blair Institute shortly and his relationship with Larry Ellison and all of those tech overlords that we are paying homage to.
By the end of this Parliament, let me spell that out. You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom if you do not have digital ID. It's as simple as that. Because decent, pragmatic, fair-minded people, they want us to tackle the issues that they see around them. And of course, the truth is,
I'm not quite sure that Keir Starmer knows what are the issues that ordinary decent people have around them, because he spends so much time in Kiev and also on the stage forcing the Ukraine war along with his European partners to continue. I mean, I'd be very interested if he was interested in some domestic politics. I'd even be surprised.
we won't solve our problems if we don't also take on the root causes, looking upstream to tackle poverty, conflict, climate change, issues that aren't just intolerable for those of us who care about inequality and injustice wherever it's found in the world, but which have clear consequences for our own citizens.
Now, what Keir Starmer did not tell you was that the Brit card, of course it has to be named something with a nationalistic fervour, otherwise people aren't going to jump onto it. The Brit card with the accompanying BritCoin, which will be coming, which will be the centralised banking currency, no more cash. What he didn't tell you is that this will be used to link your access to public services. This stuff is already taking place, okay? All your health and medical records, all your taxation, all your bank accounts, all of your private browsing history, all of your social media posts will be linked to this thing, your benefits and your pension, everything digitally linked. Now, when I named my headspace, I said ID cards wasn't in the manifesto, but they weren't in the manifesto. Name me any current Labour policy that was in the manifesto that's currently being enacted, because frankly, he broke the 10 pledges. He's taken us to war with a direct conflict with Russia, and he's funding the Ukraine to the tune of I don't know how many billions at the expense of pensioners in Burnley. So everything is working to a particular plan, and that plan is to move us closer and closer into what I think is a digital prison. So first of all, Keir Starmer is one of the most, in fact, he is the most unpopular Prime Minister in living history of records about popularity of Prime Ministers in the UK. Everybody knows that he is incapable of doing this job. He is a wooden, skimmed milk tray of melted blancmange in terms of his character. He has zero backbone, and should I say, he has the backbone of an earthworm in a garden. There isn't anything. It's just soft pink tissue. And therefore that leads to the question, the second part of my headspace, who is behind all of this? Well, in my opinion, Keir Starmer is a marionette, and the government is still being run by Mr. Tony Blair. And he lost his supporter in Mr. Mandelson, because Mr. Mandelson was the trade envoy to America. He's very much involved with all of these rather dubious characters, and he was, referred to as the master of dark arts. And his protege was Morgan McSweeney, the same Morgan McSweeney that held a slush fund of close to £800,000 through Labour together to get Keir Starmer elected. So can you see, Keir Starmer is the cutout. He comes forward and says, I am credible. He says whatever he needs to say to get himself back into power. That was what Labour Together did, which was also funded by, let's not forget it, Zionist funding. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, he is now pushing an agenda, a globalist agenda, which is essentially the digitization of everything, and also the complete control of the population using the digital space. Because essentially, you can be plugged out from the digital space if you don't behave or don't say the right things, or you espouse particular opinions and views. That's what happens. You just get plugged out. Remember the truckers in Canada. So when I said to you who's behind it in my opinion is this globalist agenda. And who are the proponents of the globalist agenda in the UK? Well, that would be the Tony Blair Institute. Now, for all of those people who don't know, Tony Blair was a prime minister 30 years ago who also tried to introduce ID cards then. It wasn't successful. And then we had the introduction of ID cards during COVID. That also wasn't successful. And now the ID card has had another masticization, and now it's about helping illegal immigration. And it's being brought forward by Mr. Keir Starmer. Note that Kemi Badenoch, the opposition leader with the Conservative Party, says she's slightly on the fence on it. So, like I said before, you've got the duopoly of politics. You have the Labour Party, then you have the Conservative Party, but they're funded by the same people and they have the same policies, kinda. Slightly different wording and a bit different PR. So I transgress somewhat. Who's behind it? The Tony Blair Institute. Let me give you a little bit of information about the Tony Blair Institute and also about the encroaching relationship of AI in our public space. And this answers the second part of my headspace question. Who is behind it? And let's talk about the relationship with the Tony Blair Institute, Larry Ellison, and then I'm going to come to Tommy Robinson. So the Tony Blair Institute is a non-profit organisation. It has a number of areas that it straddles: policy and strategy, tech and innovation, setup and delivery of key priorities. One of the largest backers at the Tony Blair Institute is Larry Ellison, the same Larry Ellison who's one of the largest contributors to the IDF, and also through his company Palantir to settlements in Gaza. Not settlements, but essentially settlers who go into Gazan areas and then basically act violently towards Palestinians. He's a big funder of that through his companies. In July of this year, the government opened a memorandum of understanding with OpenAI. Larry Ellison owns 40% of OpenAI. Interesting, don't you think? And they signed a memorandum of understanding to provide AI adoption in public spaces. This is the same Larry Ellison who's funding the Tony Blair Institute in 45 countries around the world. And if you look at the projects that the Tony Blair Institute is forging forward, invariably they are to do with AI, data and digital infrastructure, consolidation of health records, and advanced AI solutions to government services. Essentially taking public money and putting them in private hands, private taxpayer money, putting them in private hands, and then using your relationship with these organizations, him and all of the individuals, the Metas and the Open AIs, and bringing us those public services, and then our governments are paying for it. So basically, funneling public expenditure into the hands of private individuals so that they can give public sector solutions. This, in my opinion, is the reason behind the digital IDs. So the reason I mentioned the Tony Blair Institute and Larry Ellison and digital IDs is because they're all linked. There is a very small tech class who have the support of, the revolving door of governments, or should I say people in government, Peter Mandelson, Tony Blair. I mean, all you have to do is look at who's been in these spaces. It's very incestuous. And the businesses they create and then foster on the public as solutions for our good. And the digital ID is that. Now, what was I going to say to you also in relation to this about the links between Larry Ellison and Tommy Robinson? That event that Tommy Robinson had in London wasn't funded by him. No, it wasn't. He had significant donors on that event. I mean, let's face it, they had FaceTime with Elon Musk. They had a massive PA system. There was, all the event management that needed to take place. I think if you look a little deeper into who the event managers are, everything leads back to Mr. Larry Ellison. So let's just extrapolate that very quickly. We've got the constant fever about migration. We then have the local rabble-rouser funded by the same person, Mr. Ellison, stirring up the public on a particular issue, namely migration. Not just that, but other things, but mainly migration. And then you have Keir Starmer, who is allegedly against the type of Tommy Robinson politics, bringing in a policy that the people who are funding Mr. Robinson and the Tony Blair Institute are pushing for. It just seems very circular to me. And this is the reason why I said digital IDs. It wasn't in the Labour manifesto. Who's behind it? And let's talk about Tony Blair, Larry Ellison, and let's not forget in Tommy Robinson. And the reason I've tried to come to it with these different strands is because this, in my opinion, is like a pantomime. You have you have this idea that we're going to go down the road of digital IDs, and then everybody's against digital IDs, but yet you're being told it's to do with illegal migration. But how is digital IDs going to address a question of illegal migration? Because no one coming on a small boat is going to hold up their smartphone and say, sorry, this is my digital ID. So it's not actually going to address that. And the corollary at the same time is there are no questions around proper routes for migration being put in place so that people are not coming here illegally. And then you've got the likes of Tony Blair basically recycling Keir Starmer as the marionette leader that he is, and he's like a ventriloquist dummy. And he comes out here and he trots out this policy and says, oh, we've got to be tough against reform. We've got to be tough. We've got to stop being squeamish about immigration. We need to, stand firm and resolute in this situation. When in fact, the whole thing is engineered so that, in my opinion, you can have the friends of ex-prime ministers enjoying public money, making them even richer than what you've got enough money already. Why do you need to be even richer to the extent where it's becoming ridiculous, so that they can do what? If people start to complain about things, well, do you know what? We'll just turn off your access to travel, because you won't be able, everything's going to be linked to the digital ID. How many times you travel, you'll be told, well, you can't go on holiday anymore. You've used too much of your carbon footprints. This whole idea of your 15-minute cities, what happens in this digital world when you've exceeded your carbon footprint? Are you no longer allowed to leave? And if you leave, somehow you're being tracked. And then if you do leave, after you've been told not to leave because you've exceeded your carbon credits, because we're working towards, net zero, you're effectively marooned. And this is why I think so many people are railing against it, because we're becoming more and more aware of our being denuded, essentially. We're just being reduced into individuals whose only function is to pay tax so the moneyed and political classes can go off on jollies at our expense. Political jollies, be it the Ukraine, be it China, be it destroying Russia, be it, invading and undermining other people's countries from within. That's what we're being reduced to. And this is the reason why I think the digital ID is such a dangerous place for the country to move towards. I mean, this country has always resisted digital IDs. Even after the Second World War, we didn't go down the route of digital IDs. We can already prove who we are with our national insurance number, with our passport, with our social security records. We don't need to use this system. And I think this is about the authoritarianism of entrenched inequity getting fully embedded into our society, so that generations down the road it cannot be removed. Because if you think about Tony Blair and Tony Blair's son. Tony Blair's son is a multi-millionaire based on allegedly, fantastic business acumen. It's nothing to do with that. He's a Nepo baby, basically. He's Tony Blair's son, so whatever daddy's eating, he's eating too. And that's the nature of our society. It's all about nepotism. It's all about whether or not who you know and how much you're able to facilitate the ambitions of a very small group of people whose primary concern is the containment of their power and the never-ending experience they have of always being in a position of control. And that's to me why digital IDs should not be allowed to work. You have to have some way of addressing this kind of inequity that's being perpetrated. It's seeping into our public services. This sort of cronyism, you're somebody's friend. It's the whole Mandelson thing. You're somebody's friend, and that friend gets to do business deals. And I just find it a bit disgusting, and I don't know, sickening, in a way, because if these things are not being put in front of us because it's for the betterment of society, it's being put in front of us for the profiteering of somebody's friend or somebody's business ally. And that to me is the reason why we've got digital IDs. It's nothing to do with safety. It's just to do with controlling the population. And that's what I think we're moving towards. I think it's moving towards more authoritarianism. And it's also about compressing freedom of speech. Because you don't say what I like, do what I like in the right way, then you know what we'll do? We'll just effectively remove you from society as you know it. And you won't be able to participate. And that to me is a very dystopian 1984 future, if you know anything about George Orwell's book 1984. It's very dystopian, and I think we're just moving towards this surveyed biometric society, which, you know, maybe a generation from now you won't even be able to participate in, because don't forget, government changes, and once these infrastructures are in place, they are not removed. And this will be the precursor for the digital currency, which means that you will not be able to use cash anymore. And that money has an expiry date like a loaf of bread. That's what's going to happen. And you'll have everything centralized under one single system, which eventually the whole of Europe's going to be engulfed in. And I think this is the direction of travel. That's why so many people are against the digital ID system. And it hasn't worked. I mean, if you look at where it's been introduced in Estonia with the help of the Blair Institute, of course, India and Denmark, it's been hacked at least 3 or 4 times. And there has been massive data breaches. And there's no recompense for the likes of you and me, whose data is then harvested and sold on the illegal web. So what do we do, essentially, with this whole digital ID system? I think we absolutely have to fight it tooth and nail. We cannot agree that it's something that's going to go forward. I know there's a petition out there and lots of people are signing the petition, but I honestly think that this may be Keir Starmer's poll tax. For those who are, mature enough to remember that, Margaret Thatcher tried to bring in a poll tax and the UK erupted. And I think this is going to happen here, because I don't think people are going to walk kindly and blindly into this space, primarily because you've used and you've erected the bogeymen of migrants rushing across the channel. So yes, it was a really long one. And let me just remind you of the title, Digital IDs. That wasn't in the Labour manifesto. Who's behind it? I answered that question. Let's talk about Tony Blair, the Blair Institute, Larry Ellison, and also Tommy Robinson. I answered all of those questions. I hope I did. So give me your thoughts on this particular headspace. Jump up in the comments. Give me your 3 pence, your 3 cedis, or your declining dollar price, or your new BritCoin, which will, I'm sure, keep you in that lovely space where, if I told you not allowed to have any more milk this week, you've had too much, we've got to conserve the environment. You'll soon be having your cup of teas curtailed and measured by the state. Don't forget to make a donation. See you next week. And cut.